Happy Sunday, everyone. Happy to be here. I am actually coming at you live from Puerto Rico. I flew in on a red-eye last night, left at midnight, and got here at noon after a layover of about an hour. So I'm operating on probably about 3 hours of sleep or so, and so this will be fun. I'm actually looking forward to this topic. But before I head down to the beach, I'll show you guys my view. It's a pretty nice view here in a minute for those who are watching on the live. I know a ton of people listen on the podcast later, but I'll show the live folks that. So, okay, this topic that I wanted to talk about this week, guys, I have like a long list of topics, and it's hard for me to pick which one that I want to pick because I'm like, I want to talk about that. I want to do that one. And so this one I chose because of what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. And everyone's attention is fixated on this, right? Like you can't help but, just like it was during COVID, every day they had like the death counts and the case counts and everyone's talking about it and all of our attention is fixated on this thing, right? And so everyone is like the media machine is bringing this like laser focus on COVID. Now it's Russia and Ukraine and everyone's freaking out and World War III, and you know, a lot of them are ignorant of what's been happening in past years and the USA's involvement in some of these things in the past years that has contributed to what's now happening. And so many people don't understand this. They just see, oh, we gotta help Ukraine, we gotta send them bombs and planes and money and all these things. And they don't take these broader things into context. So I was thinking through this, and I was like, all right, what do the scriptures say? You know, what does our faith have to teach us about this? And there's a scripture that came to mind that I don't think I've like ever heard this really brought up in gospel doctrine. I don't really think that this scripture gets much airtime in our church, and it's something that I thought is extremely relevant to what's going on right now. So the title of today's musing is, Are Christians Deceived? And specifically I'm talking about this topic of deceived about what's really going on in the world. And here's the scripture. So this comes from Doctrine and Covenants 38. So I'm actually going to read a few verses and then we'll unpack it. And so for those joining who don't know, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We believe in modern revelation. The Doctrine and Covenants is a compilation of many of these modern revelations. God continues to talk to his people, and so that's what DNC 38 is. It's one of these modern revelations. And here's what this says, because this relates, in my mind, to Russia and Ukraine. It relates to kind of the chaos of the world, and it's an extremely relevant verse that, again, I feel like, or set of verses that I feel like we don't really talk about. So this is in DNC 38, and I'm going to start with verses 28, and we're going to read through 31. So in 28 it says, I say unto you that the enemy in the secret chambers seeketh your lives. Ye hear, and here's kind of the relevant part. Ye hear of wars in far countries, and you say that there will soon be great wars in far countries, but ye know not the hearts of men in your own land. And then he goes on in 30. I tell you these things because of your prayers. Wherefore treasure up wisdom in your bosoms, lest the wickedness of men reveal these things unto you by their wickedness, in a manner which shall appear in your ears, with a voice louder than that which shall shake the earth. But if you are prepared, you shall not fear. We often quote that part of the scriptures. I've heard that a lot. If you are prepared, you shall not fear. But that's this tiny little like section of this broader context of verses. And then finally in 31, and that ye might escape the power of the enemy, and be gathered unto me a righteous people without spot and blameless. So the point is that we want to escape the power of the enemy. And then in verse 28, that enemy is in the secret chambers. It seeketh our lives. We know this from ether aid and the secret combinations and trying to get above us and control us and power and all these things, right? So God is revealing this so that we can escape the power of the enemy and be a righteous people. And yes, sure, if you are prepared, you shall not fear. So we often focus on that. Just last week, I talked about preparedness. And I talked about the importance of being prepared so that we don't fear. That's an extremely relevant thing. But it has far broader application than that. So specifically in verse 29, ye hear of wars in far countries, and you say that there will soon be great wars in far countries. That relates to right now, I think, okay? But ye know not the hearts of men in your own land. When I titled this, Are Christians Deceived? That is what I'm referencing. because the media machine tells us what to be out. What's our daily outrage? Oh, this thing is happening. Never mind the fact that the USA has been involved in past years, and that the USA is the aggressor in other countries and bombing the crap out of people and killing people and all these other problems. We're supposed to be really outraged about specifically what they're saying right now, and all fixated in a tizzy on, will there be a war, and we should go help Ukraine, and we want to avoid World War III, and blah, blah, blah. And so we are being manipulated in order to fashion an outcome that people want for reasons that are not our own. And so we hear of wars in far countries, and we say that there will soon be wars in other countries. This is all true. This is relevant right now. But we don't know the hearts of men in our own land. So I'm not going to get in too much today to like the whole secret combination thing. I'm going to save a whole separate episode for that issue more narrowly. But it relates here. Right? The enemy is in the secret chambers. It seeks our lives. There are people who are trying to control and manipulate us. They are trying to concoct or manipulate external events to influence us to think and feel a certain way so that we support a certain set of actions, which will have a certain set of consequences that these individuals like. And we're outraged at the Putins of the world, but we don't know the hearts of men in our own land. God is saying that there are nefarious things happening in your midst, and rather than looking at the mote in your own eye, you're the beam in your own eye, you're looking at the mote in in Putin's eye. I always get mote and beam confused. I don't remember which is which. But the point is that it's so easy for us to be outraged at what someone else is doing, but what are we doing? What are we not doing? And what are people in our midst doing to manipulate us that we don't even know about? That, I think, is the biggest area where Christians are being deceived. We are falling prey to the media machine and its machinations, and we're outraged at what we're told to be outraged about, but we don't understand that we are being manipulated, that it is called the engineering of consent. And I'm going to share one or two specific examples of this in a little bit. So in the scriptures, God talks a lot about cleansing the inward vessel. So Jesus said, "Cleanse first that which is within the cup. Ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness." And then finally, Moroni wrote that God has said that the inward vessel shall be cleansed first. I take from this to mean that we are supposed to get our own house in order. We are supposed to root out corruption and fixate and focus on the problems in our own midst rather than ignoring them and not even being aware of them, and instead fixating on Putin and other people abroad. There are always people like that. There will always be people like that. But how hypocritical it is for us to say, you're interfering in elections when the USA has been interfering in many elections. You're, going to war against another country illegally. Oh, hey, the USA has, done this too. Like, the hypocrisy is the problem. And we cannot, in good faith or good conscience or with any moral standing, allow to happen what is being happened while also pretending to be outraged about what someone else is doing. And so the inward vessel has to be cleansed first. Us individually, our communities, our nation, whatever, like all of these things apply. But if we don't know the hearts of men in our own land, then we're going to be inconsistent and I think even hypocritical if we're outraged at what is happening in faraway countries and these wars and rumors of wars. Like, sure, let's follow the news, let's be aware, but my gosh, if we're just like engaged in the daily outrage that we're told to be outraged about without really fixating on and working on fixing the problems here, then it's an inconsistency that I think is a problem. So the inward vessel is what's important. I've shared this before, I think, but in my mind, there's a really fascinating trend in the Book of Mormon when Mosiah, basically, they stopped the kings. They got the Jaredite Record translated. Do you remember that kind of big circle and Coriantumr and all this, right? They got the Jaredite Record translated, and it was a tale of corrupt kings. It was a tale of bloodshed and ruthless lust for power because of the centralization of political power in this kingship. And it was this constant battle to wrest control and then dominate other people. That's what the Book of Ether is, and that's what the Jaredite Record was. So Mosiah gets this, and it's translated now, and he's looking at this, and he realizes, holy cow, like, I'm a decent king, I'm a benevolent king, but because we have this model of government, it is creating a lot of risk that someone else can wrest control of that power and then cause a lot of harm. So instead, let's change our form of government and institute judges to use God's law and basically just interpret and enforce that rather than having this centralized power. So they changed their form of government in basically direct reaction to what they read in the Jaredite Record. And so it's amazing. They have like this kind of quasi self-government now, right? There's no more monarchy, and you might say that that's almost like a, republic of sorts, or some kind of like quasi-democratic judiciary type system. But the point I want to drive home is that that's when Alma heats up, the book of Alma, that people love to skip over because it's just a bunch of war, right? Like it's just we call it the war chapters in Alma. And while true, those people who pass over the scriptures are missing a key point. The Book of Mormon documents 15 specific wars from the time that Mosiah relinquished the monarchy, so the Nephite kind of change in government, all the way through Christ. 15 wars are recorded. There may have been more, they weren't recorded. These 15 that were recorded, every single one of them. We think of this, how do you think of this? What's the narrative in gospel doctrine when we read the war chapters in the Book of Mormon? The narrative is, Lamanites bad, Nephites good. And sure, Nephites struggled at times and were wicked at times and so forth. But that's like the general bifurcation. It's the Lamanites coming to fight the Nephites, and the Nephites are having to repel these invasions and fight back. That is not at all what the Book of Mormon talks about. It is not the Lamanites coming to attack the Nephites. In every single one of those instances, all 15 of them, once the Nephites are in kind of control of their own destiny, their political destiny, all 15 feature Nephite instigators, Nephite disaffected, power-seeking, power-hungry people. All of them were the Lamanites being used as puppets to further the agenda of some Nephites who knew how the Nephite system operated and leveraged that knowledge to instigate a war and use the Lamanites in specific ways to cause the most damage to the Nephites. Every single one of those 15 was a disaffected former Nephite who leveraged their power and knowledge and fomented the Lamanites into being used as pawns for nefarious ends that they didn't even understand. I mean, think of Amalickiah and all the deceptions, and they were being told one thing and it was not true, and the king's servants did this, and it's just a bunch of lies. But it was a Nephite, a former Nephite, that was doing it. And it was for these wicked ends, this desire to wrest control of the political power. Every single one of the 15. My mind was blown when this guy, J. Crawford Smith, years ago, put me onto this. And I was reading through these, I'm like, holy crap, every single one. So this is the inward vessel. This is, you don't know the hearts of men in your own land. You're looking at the Lamanites thinking they're wicked, or you're looking at this other people and you're blaming them and, they're corrupt or whatever, right? But you're seeing these external things and you don't understand what is happening in your own midst. That to me is one of the most instructive lessons of the Book of Mormon, that this is happening in our day. Gordon B. Hinckley talked about how the Book of Mormon is more inspired and inspiring than the morning newspaper, and I believe it, other than the fact that no one gets a morning newspaper anymore, right? So it's more inspired and inspiring than wherever you consume your news. But that this happened, and that this is a trend, and that this is happening in our day. And here's a modern revelation where God is saying, you're paying attention to all this foreign stuff, but you don't know what's going on in your own backyard. You don't know what these manipulators are doing to you. So 2 quick stories. The first I shared on Facebook a few days ago. This 15-year-old girl, Naira, goes and testifies to Congress in 1990. And she's telling through tears and this horrible sob story about how all these Iraqi soldiers, Saddam's soldiers, were unplugging babies in the NICU from their machines and tossing them out of incubators, and this horribly brutal set of circumstances that shocked the public. There was this congressional committee and the president at the time, Bush, and and reporters pick this up, and this story goes viral for 1990, whatever viral meant back then. But Americans were shocked, and this story was cited again and again to justify Americans going to war in what later was Operation Desert Storm and getting involved in the Middle East. The problem is Naira was fake. This 15-year-old girl was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador, which was not known at the time. She didn't use her last name, and they're changing things, and it was total manipulation. And the Kuwaiti government hired a PR firm in D.C. That was co-owned by Bush's former chief of staff. They paid $1 million to this PR firm. This is all verified. They paid him $1 million to do focus groups and identify how they could shift American public, the opinion of the American public in favor of war. And they identified that if they had a story like this incubator, baby killing story, that would so shock the American public that they would radically increase their support of the United States government going to war. So they focus grouped this story. They got the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter to be the patsy, coached her. They literally coached her on how to do this and how to be emotional and how to do all this. And then they go plant her in front of Congress to give this sob story. It was completely bogus. And then another example is Operation Northwoods, which has since been declassified. This is when the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the military, the top brass, the top leaders, went to the President of the United States and proposed to kill American citizens and blame it on people in a different country that they wanted to go to war with in order to get Americans to support going to war against that country. Well, that country was Cuba. This is during the whole Cuban Missile Crisis kind of era. And that president was JFK. And the only reason this didn't happen is because JFK shot it down. But the top leaders in the United States military, the very top, despite their oath of, their oath, their, ethics, whatever they may be, proposed bombing American cities, drowning people in boats off the coast of Florida, killing Americans, blaming it on the Cubans in order to get Americans to want to go to war against Cuba, because support at the time was very low. So you got to ask yourself, are these anomalies? Did this only happen decades ago? Does it not happen today? What are we being told right now that is bogus and that we won't know for decades, if ever? So we look at the wars and the rumors of wars in faraway countries, but we don't know the hearts of men in our own land. And God is telling us this in D&C 38. We read verses 28 through 31. He's telling us this because he wants to gather a righteous people. He wants us to escape the power of enemy, which hides in the secret chambers and seeketh our lives. You're paying attention to the wars in faraway countries, but you don't know what's going on with people in your own. And I don't know why Latter-day Saints are not more woke to this. Why are we not awakened? Ether 8 says that God commands us to awaken to our awful situation so that this enemy does not get power above us. And we are asleep. I mean, Benson for decades was preaching this, and everyone got sick of it. I think the Lord shut his mouth. He became president of the church, and he didn't really say much of any of this before. And you see that pattern in the Book of Mormon over and over again, where Nephi is like, I wish I could say more, but the Lord said not to. Or Ether has to go hide in a rock and not preach anymore. Over and over again, these prophets want to preach, want to warn, want to do what they're doing, but they don't, because the Lord says they had their shot and they wouldn't listen. Line upon line, and if we don't act on what we've been given, we don't get the greater light, we get more condemnation. We don't get anything more. So I think this is a huge thing right now. I think there are lies swirling around all over the place. I don't think this was just decades ago. I think it's worse today. When you think of like technology, I mean, think of deep fakes. I mean, that is going to be a crazy world when we can't trust what we're seeing. And when misinformation is flying around from official sources, when the fact checkers are validating lies as they are right now, but way worse. I think it's worse today than it was decades ago. I bet way more of this stuff is happening in the upper echelons of government than it ever did before. But if we don't know, then we don't know. And how do we know? And that's the key. Because we look at the wars and we hem and haw. We post on Facebook and we get all up in arms about what Putin is. I mean, have you ever read Osama bin Laden's letter, by the way? Like, this is semi-tangential, but like, everyone's up in arms about Osama bin Laden and terrorists and Al-Qaeda and everything else. I know of like 3 people who have ever read Osama bin Laden's letter. Open letter to the world. The Western media didn't cover this at all. It doesn't justify anything the guy was involved in at all, but it helps us understand why he did what he did. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Go Google it. It's a fascinating read. But we're so manipulated. Our opinions are engineered by people who want them to be fashioned in a certain way. And then we're all surprised when it turns out to not be that case. Over and over again. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And yet we've been fooled 1,000 times. I think it's shameful. This is semi-related, but I remember in 2004, when I was first starting to kind of read up on some of this stuff and secret combinations and the scriptures and everything. And I remember watching an interview that Tim Russert did on Meet the Press, Sunday morning political news kind of show. And George Bush was running for re-election, and the Democrat nominee was John Kerry. And Tim Russert interviewed both of them. I believe it was a separate interview. I don't think it was a joint interview. I think it was a separate interview. No, maybe it was together. I think they were together. But anyways, he asks both of them, both John Kerry and George Bush, hey, what's this Skull and Bones secret society that you're both members of? This highly secretive, conspiratorial, elite political kind of club that you're both connected to from your university days. And they both kind of like giggled and, oh, it's so secret, I can't talk about it. And Tim Russert pressed, and he's like, what about the number? It was like 43. They have some like code number for Skull and Bones. And I'm not saying like Skull and Bones is like, whatever, like maybe it is. But the point was, like, these guys are involved in this like highly secretive thing that no one ever talked about. Tim Russert was the only journalist I ever saw ask that question. He probed them further, and they wouldn't say anything. And then you got to wonder, what's happening in some of these secret clubs? What type of promises are being made, or oaths are being taken, or favors being traded? Even if it's innocuous, which I don't think it is, but even if it is, like, the people in power are all basically in the same, like, bohemian type clubs of power, and it's like we're in this chess game that people think it's checkers, and we elect this person, and then we elect this person, and then this person happens, and I'm going to jump over you 2 spaces, and we think we're in this like normal checkers game, when I think a lot of these elite people understand that they're playing 10 moves ahead, and this is like, Russia level chess of like these like 13-year-olds who can like predict all these outcomes in the future and see what's really going on. So I'm not going to talk about the solutions right now to understanding the hearts of men in our own land. I think that's worth it for each of us to ponder, because I might have some different solutions and a different path than some of you. I more wanted to raise awareness of the problem of what God is saying here in response to this almost obsession. I mean, the early saints were kind of obsessed with like last day wars and the apocalyptic events leading up to Christ's second coming. And so there was a lot of like early talk in the church and the saints about this type of stuff. And that's in part what some of this is in reference to. And I think, I think that's in the church a little bit today still, maybe not as fervently. But even if it's not this religious apocalyptic second coming thing, it's very much this like Russia-Ukraine thing right now, or the war on terror before it and still, and like just these kind of conventional political, geopolitical things. And we pay attention to them, and we worry about them, and we post on social media about them, and we chat about them, and we have opinions about them. But where is that level of scrutiny and disgust and skepticism and investigation and discussion when it comes to, the elite thought controllers of our day and these people who are pulling the strings? And if we gave them more attention and brought them more transparency, then things might change. So that's it. That's the, now I'll do what I promised. So for those of you who came in late, I'm in Puerto Rico right now. I just arrived after taking a red eye. So I'm here for the week, and, oh wow, that's kind of loud. So we got a pool, and we got palm trees, and we got a beach, and I'm gonna go for a walk and have a relaxing Sunday stroll on the beach in Puerto Rico. We're gonna do some fun stuff while here. So thought I'd pop off a Sunday musing while I could before I go get busy and before I start yawning a lot more from getting only 3 hours of sleep on the plane. If you're not already, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on your favorite podcast app if you haven't caught any past things. This is more just a fun outlet for me to share some thoughts, and I get a lot of messages from listeners who are suggesting new ideas or appreciative of having something more kind of intellectually interesting than a lot of Sunday school lessons tend to be. So hope you guys appreciate it. I appreciate each of you for listening and sharing and subscribing, and just a fun little side thing that I do, and it's become something fun for me to just spend more time pondering throughout the week a lot of these ideas and studying a bit more. It's been good for myself to just spend more time with the scriptures and ponder some of these ideas. A lot of them I've written about or thought about in years or a decade or two past, but this has been good for me. So even if no one listens or shares or subscribes, I'm gonna keep doing it. It's good for me. It's cathartic. It's enjoyable to have a little bit of an outlet. But if you enjoy it too, then I appreciate you, and happy to have you along for the ride. Hope you guys all have an awesome week, and I'll soak in a few rays for you here in Puerto Rico, and we'll talk to you soon.